Let's talk about falafel. You know those deep fried balls of chickpeas? Falafel's a pretty old dish. It was invented by these Christian Copts in Egypt who wanted a meat-free thing to eat during Lent. And one of them, or many of them, had the brilliant idea, let's deep fry some chickpeas. It was a meat substitute, basically the first Impossible Burger. Pretty tasty too, if you ask me. From Egypt, the food spread around the Middle East and became a culinary staple. In the late 1940s and 1950s, a bunch of Jews from Eastern Europe immigrated to Israel. And when these Jews immigrated, they wanted to sort of shed their European traditions and adopt new ones that connected them to the land and their biblical roots. So to culturally assimilate in the land of Israel, a lot of these new European Jews took up Arab traditions and cultural patterns. For example, some of the Jewish settlers referred to themselves as Hebrew Bedouins, and others even wore Arab headdresses. They also wanted to assimilate through their food. So to do so, they looked around, saw what the Arabs were eating, and they were like, that chickpea ball looks pretty darn tasty. The consumption of falafel served these European Jews a couple of different purposes. On the one hand, it allowed them to become a part of the land, to eat a native and local food. On the other hand, a lot of these Jews were socialists. And the falafel as a simple food, as a street food, as a humble food represented these ideals too. Thus, falafel was just the perfect dish for these immigrants. It both connected them to the land of Israel and it held up their political values. Here is how historian Yael Raviv puts it. Falafel was used by the Israeli nationalist movement to establish and enhance the ties that would bond the Jewish people to the land of Israel. In fact, this adoption of falafel as a kind of Israeli dish was strengthened in the early years of the nation because there was an economic downturn, and thus the government instituted meat rations, and so everyone was turning to meatless options, and they thought, what is the Impossible Burger of our time? Oh, that must be falafel, let's eat it. In turn, falafel's popularity grew and grew and grew and grew. In the 1950s, it was served in the army, it was served in schools, it was served on airlines, it was served at state dinners. Falafel was everywhere! Everywhere! Falafel! 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 So much falafel! However, at the same time, some Israeli Jews began to portray Arabs as the enemy, and thus, Arab cultural products like falafel took on negative connotations. Some Israeli cookbook writers and chefs, when talking about and writing about falafel, they actually distanced the dish from its Arab roots. Instead, they attributed it to Jewish immigrants from Yemen, even though the dish itself was not native to Yemen. Since the 1950s, falafel has just become a national symbol for Israel. You can see it on postcards, you can see it on posters, you can see it in marketing campaigns. It's like rice in Japan, and wine in France, and hot dogs in America. Foods like these become ways for nations to define themselves. They become wrapped up in what it means to be Israel, or to be Japan, or to be America, or to be France. That is the power of food. It takes on a symbolism, it is wrapped in cultural history, and in some cases, it is deep fried and tastes great in a pita.